Hi everyone, Annette Ornelas here, Southwind Designs, and this is part 2 of my binding tutorial. I've decided I better show you how to do the corners in case you don't know how to slip stitch the corners. So let me tell you first, when I put on my corners, I make this little folded piece when I do it by machine, and I stitch right over it. This kind of assigns the seam allowance to one side. And then you see that there's this corner right here of your quilt, and I actually trim off a little piece. You really need to trim a little piece off so you have room for all these folds and you kind of distribute things a little bit more equally. So when you come up to the corner, I prepare it and I use a pin for that. So I always use the binding side that is on the side that I'm not sewing on, and I fold that over, and then I pull this down and make a little triangle. When I do that, that makes the seam allowance for the back side of the quilt go to the other side, and so you have seam allowance when you're sewing it on one side and when you're slip stitching the back on the other side, and that corner is not quite as bulky because of that. So I have my pin in there. Try not to get yourself here. I don't pull it in all the way. And then I have my little clip, and let's stitch over there. Hopefully my thread won't run out. Of course, if that happens, it happens, and we'll deal with that. So, and I stitch right up to the pin. Open. I don't think I need it right now. Remember what I was mentioning in the tutorial before. I come up right at the fold of the binding, right off the binding, through the backing of the quilt, traveling through the batting, not going all the way through. I feel that on the other side. And there we go. Bindings are harder to sew on through, for example, tighter woven fabrics like batik. So just take your time and just do it a little bit slower. It will be fine. If you do a lot of quilting, like some of my quilts are heavily quilted and the layers are stitched underneath, then it's easier not to pull the needle through all that stitching. Sometimes you have to, because there's no other choice. So, okay. So this challenge right now, as you can see, I'm having the loop that forms as you're pulling your thread through. It wants to kind of catch on that pin that I used to pin down the corner. Okay. So as I'm coming up to it, I'm holding on with my thumb and my finger underneath to just kind of keep my corner in place. I pull that out and I take one little stitch. Whoa. And I go back in and I take a stitch on the far side of the binding. And before I stitch through the quilt, I also stitch on the closer side of the binding. And I do another stitch on the far side. And wouldn't you know it, my thread broke. Unbelievable. But that's okay. I have enough to keep on going. Of course, it won't come together. I have to, there we go. So I'm going to move on to the other side, and I'm going to stitch on like I did before. Okay. Now some people, and maybe if you do put your quilt in a show at a future time, some people like to stitch all this closed. You can always come back and do that, but the main thing is to get the binding on first. So that's what I'm focused on. So I'll talk to you later, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Bye.